This is the Discipleship, the Directive podcast with Dr. Dan Crawford. He is the founder and president of DiscipleAllNations.org. And my name is Vidal, and I am your host. Dr. Crawford, he is also the professor emeritus on evangelism and discipleship for the Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. Welcome, everybody, and especially you, Dr. Crawford. Welcome to your podcast. How are you today?
Doing great. Good day.
Well, it's good to have you. Good to see you. And we are privileged to continue the conversation on ministry and life. And if anything, I've been learning just doing this podcast with you is the delight of learning. I love to learn, and I love to see how the Lord has walked throughout many decades of service that you began back in South Texas, where I'm recording from, because I live in Mission, Texas. And your journey of serving in so many places had taken you to meet a lot of people. And our guest today is one of those individuals that you personally have had the opportunity and the privilege to serve with. And Dr. Crawford, I'm speaking of Brother Joel Salazar, which I love for you to introduce officially to our podcast.
Be glad to do that. This is a longtime friend of mine. I was privileged to serve as interim pastor at Central Baptist Church in Livingston, Texas. And Joel was the minister of music and worship there at that time. That was a great experience together. They called a pastor. I left. A few months later, Joel calls and says, "Got to come back." Another interim pastor. So I went for a second round, and we had a good time the second time around. And he has moved on. He is the minister of music and worship at First Baptist Church in Grand Prairie, Texas now. And Joel and Becky are just great friends of Joanne and I, and we still enjoy getting together for a meal and just sharing life with them, and watching their daughter get married a few weeks ago. We just enjoy the relationship that developed in those interims and the ongoing friendship that we have with them. So welcome, Joel. We're glad to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Dan.
Well, it's good to have you, brother. Thank you for joining us. And let me, before I ask you a couple of questions, some of the things that are said in the podcast, although we do have a script, are just news to me. I never, and most of you guys, and you including Joel, people that I never met before, which is very exciting. But let me ask you this quick question. Now that I've heard that you are at First Baptist Grand Prairie, is that where you are?
Yes.
So are you guys, is the church close by Dallas Baptist University?
It is, actually. We have some Dallas Baptist University students that come to our church. Yeah.
All right. So I'm a big Jason's Deli guy. And there's a Jason's Deli close to your church that I thought.
That's right. Right by the IKEA.
I know exactly where you are.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Our youngest son just graduated from DBU, from Dallas Baptist. That's the connection.
Awesome.
I'm in Mission, Texas. I'm in South Texas, but our son was there.
Yes.
But listen, man, thank you for being here. It's good to have you. Good to meet you. Give us a quick update. What's going on? How's life? How's family doing for you?
Well, I've been here close to 12 years, I believe. We came here in 2009 from Livingston and have had a wonderful ministry. We moved the church in 2015 from the downtown area. Had been there over 100 years. And since we've moved here, God has really blessed our growth. It's in a great area, as you can tell, since you've been in this area. It's very progressive. So our church has really changed from a typical, white collar Baptist church to a more of a heavenly church, where we're seeing people from all over the world come to our church and getting saved. And these are people that aren't raised in the church, and they're coming here to the United States, and they are finding the Lord. And so it is amazing to be a part of that, to see what God is doing.
What an exciting report, brother. That's wonderful news. And that plugs right into the podcast, because that's exactly the core of everything that we do within the ministry of Dr. Crawford on evangelism and spiritual formation. Let me ask you a kind of a twofold question over your relationship with Dr. Crawford, because you have known him now for years, and you guys go back into the Livingston ministry back in those areas. When you served with him, the first question is, how or what did you see of the church benefiting from the ministry of Dr. Crawford? And at the same time, is there anything that you can tell us on your personal relationship that you benefited from the ministry, the teaching, the influence, the mentorship of Dr. Crawford?
Well, there were two stints, like Dan said. First, in 1999, we lost our pastor that I'm with now. I was with this pastor 9 years. Then he came here to First Baptist Church, Grand Prairie. And so I'm serving with him now. Came after 10 years of us not being together. And I'm talking about Dr. Bill Scarr, now have served together over 22 years. But one thing I saw that Dan helped is, of course, the treasure full of knowledge he has in evangelism and ministry. He not only ministers to the layperson, but he ministers to the staff, and that is one thing. Like he said, the first stint was really a smooth stint, because it wasn't that long that we found another pastor, and Dan helped us through that transition. It's always hard when you lose a pastor that's been there 9 years, and God worked real well when Dr. Scarr was there. But he felt God calling him to the Grand Prairie area. But it's always difficult for the church. We were in a building program. We were building the Wellmaker building, which Dan helped us through that process. And for us to lose Bill, who had that vision, and then to continue the vision for people to give was really easy. And we were able to make that happen. There was joy in the house, and when there's joy in the house, man, God works. And so God really helped us through that transition. I would like to say, and I'll tell you about the next transition as you asked, but that transition was great because we also needed a pastor and as the staff. And so for us to be able to be along Dan, we were very blessed. Dan has that way of ministering to. He has a dry wit. He makes things fun in our meetings. He's knowledgeable. He knows when to be serious, and he knows when to be have fun. And that's me. Yes, I like to be serious at times, but there's times also that you just want to have a good time. And Dan and I went to Europe together, and with Joanne and my wife, and like I say, we've had some great times. And it made it very easy to have him the second time, because we knew what to expect, and the church knew what to expect. That's why they brought him in, because they would have had him a third time if he was available, but he wasn't available. But anyway, we were blessed to have him both times.
Well, and as much as you mentioned that before, many times it's just difficult to lose a pastor. Leadership is crucial.
Yes.
It's part of God's calling to have the structure and the systems and those individuals that lead the church. And yet people like Dr. Crawford play a major role in seasons of transition. So Dr. Crawford, just listening to the testimony from Brother Joel, what are your thoughts? What is coming to your mind as you listen to what took place back then?
I was just thinking the two interim pastorates were almost like two different churches.
Yes.
As he said, the first one was it's been a lot of good years. It was just fun being there. There weren't any serious problems, and we just rocked along.
Yes.
The second time followed a rather disturbing time in the life of the church. In fact, when Joel called me, it was late on a Sunday night, and things had happened that day. And he called and he said, "Can you get here by Wednesday?" And I hadn't been used to going on Wednesday night. It was a pretty good trip, but I was there on Wednesday, and the church was very divided and devastated, and it had just not been a good time. And that was a totally different kind of interim, because there was a lot of healing that needed to take place. And
and Dan, I think I think we were desperate for a pastor, Vidal, and that's one thing. And you remember Ben Wellmaker. I don't know if you remember when he was there, and we called this guy. Ben said, I hope y'all will vote. And of course, everybody loved Dr. Ben Wellmaker. I don't know if you know him, but he was the president of the Columbia Seminary and was very involved in Hispanic missions. And so anyway, everybody loved and respected Ben, and he was, kind of the senior adult minister, but also took the place of when Dan couldn't be there, whatever, would preach. Well, he gets up there on the calling day and says, "Hey guys, listen, I believe this is God's man. We need to call him." Even though there were people who were not really happy with his just the timing, and he just wasn't what we felt like needed to happen. But of course, everybody raised their hand because we wanted to affirm Ben, not necessarily the calling of the pastor that came, and it was terrible, Vidal. It divided our church. It exploded in division. And so Dan then had to deal with that. He had to deal with two factions. And then, of course, because anytime there's a faction in the church, it rubs off on the staff. So half the church didn't like us, half the church did. And so we were trying to deal with all that as well and trying to help the church to move on. Dan helped us through all that. And it was not easy. But we made it through, and the next guy that we brought in was a jewel. And so I truly believe that it hadn't been for Dan and all the tools that he has, because he's done this for so many years, that he knows how to deal with trouble. He knows how to deal with great times, and I think you have to have somebody who's flexible to be able to help us through those times. So it was
that sermon, that I've preached in a lot of places, from the verse that says, "Where two or three are gathered together, somebody disagrees." Maybe that's not exactly what that said. Kind of a paraphrase.
That's the Dan version.
Baptist version.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
Now, knowing Dr. Crawford, even though I don't know him as long as you have, but knowing him, my assumption, because obviously I was in there when those transitions took place.
Yes.
I've been in ministry long enough to have been in places similar, but here's where I will assume, Dr. Crawford, and you need to help me with this. My assumption is when you walk into scenarios, especially the second time, which wasn't as pleasant as your first time in Livingston, my assumption is that you took the church back to the basics and fundamentals.
Right.
That will be my first thought. I don't know if I'm right or wrong. I wasn't there. But Dr. Crawford, is that what you typically do when you take on interim, ministries?
Especially when there is a issue going on in the church. I come in as an outsider. I can't solve all the problems on the third Sunday I'm there. So we just go back to the basics.
And if you'll remember, Dan, excuse me for interrupting, but if you remember, the issue was actually there while you were preaching. The issue of the pastor didn't leave. They gave him half of a year severance pay, and they didn't make it a requirement for him to leave after all this happened. So he was listening to Dan in the back seat, and he would not worship. He would just sit there with his arms. So the issue was there while we were trying to minister for about 6 months. Wasn't that right, Dan?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And after the final Sunday of that 6 months, he disappeared.
Yep.
So he was there for the 6 months of the severance pay.
Yep.
And
it was a mess.
Yeah, but you're right, Vidal. It's you do have to just start with the basics. And I don't remember which famous football coach it was now, but he was being interviewed about when times had gotten tough in a particular game, and everybody was confused and all. And what do you do? And he said, "Well, we just go back to the basics." It's good football strategy, but it's pretty good interim pastorate strategy too.
Yeah. That's right.
So let me ask you, Brother Joel, since you have known Dr. Crawford now for several years, and obviously you guys have shared multiple environments of ministry. Uh, I'm assuming, especially through this means of communication, technology, emails, websites, that you have somehow kept a little bit of touch with him and throughout the years.
Mhm.
Have you seen a difference in his ministry throughout the years, how things have progressed, or, again, going back from the Livingston years now where you guys are today? Can you speak on that a little bit of what you have seen in that progression?
Well, obviously, in I guess it's been 10 or so years that he's been our interim pastor. But to see him today, I mean, Dan and obviously he stays busy doing interim work, and that's because people like what he does. They wouldn't call him, and they'd call him back, and they'd call him back, and they'd call him back because I have seen how God has really blessed his ministry. I know he was working in Canada and doing that, and now he's working in the Valley. He obviously has a treasure chest full of tricks, and not necessarily tricks, but just experience to be able to help in whatever area comes along, and that's because of his experience. And working with Hispanics, well, he was in the Pan American, he was in the South Texas area, growing up as in his ministry, and so he's worked with Hispanics, and he knows, he understands the heart. It's a different culture, but for him to be able to be effective, whether it's in Canada or in South Texas or wherever, I have seen how God has really blessed and blossomed his ministry. And giving him these opportunities, because he is amazing at what he does.
Definitely is. And again, and now he's traveling to South Texas on a monthly basis and able to do some in-person teaching with pastors and church leaders down here. Brother, let me ask you one final question, and then I'm going to turn the time to Dr. Crawford to close us into our time together. But again, you have journeyed with him in multiple scenarios. You have been now in First Baptist Grand Prairie, now serving, you said, for 12 years now? Is that what you? Okay.
Well, it's 2009. So what would that be?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
13 years.
13 years now, but most definitely. Now, let me ask you this. And again, just going back into the journey and the pilgrimage of you guys working together. At this point, and we're able to reconnect, I'm able to meet you for the first time, but you're able to reconnect with him. Any questions or question that you might have for him that you might want to ask him, ministry-wise, spiritual formation, spiritual development, that you can think of at this point? This is kind of your opportunity to, just being with us today. Can you think of anything that you might want to ask him?
When you and Dan told me, kind of warned me about that question yesterday, and it's something that I've asked him before, but I know he's been asked this question many times, is why in the world would you not be a pastor? And I know the answer to that, Dan, but why in the world would you not be a pastor rather than an interim pastor in your life? Why would God call you into an interim work when you have so much to give as a pastor? And I know what the answer is, but I'm going to let him say it.
Well, because I grew up at the pastor's house. My dad was a pastor, and my prayer through my teenage years, when I began to feel God calling me, I said, Lord, I'll do anything you want me to do. Please don't make me be a pastor. And so I think God has a great sense of humor. He said, okay, I'll just let you be interim pastor at now 29 churches.
Right.
So I probably should have stayed at one for 29 years or something. So, I don't know. I guess the bottom line answer, Joel, we've talked about this, is that God didn't call me to be a pastor.
That's it.
And so I've done a lot of things. But
and there was room for that calling, because God has obviously used you in that calling, very much so. And I was in evangelism. I traveled with a family, and I saw the other side, so I understand evangelism. But I also realized how important it was for me to stay in a church and to make a church. That's a different. There's different differences there that I had to use in my gifts to be able to stay and work, rather than just use 6 shots and then move on to the next church and use 6 shots of my bullets. In my case, I have to have an AK-47 and be able to have clips, because I mean it's a little bit different than being evangelist. And I think God calls us to either evangelism or to be in a church full time. But yes, that was the answer that we've talked about many times. That's your calling, and God has used that calling because you've answered it.
And again, you got to remember also that part of the calling for Dr. Crawford has also been of the training of pastors.
That's right.
That's what he does as well, and has done it for many, many years, which, by the way, speaking of the training of pastors, I want to remind everybody that the website is discipleallnations.org, which you see on the screen, and you are able to access all of those resources that the Lord has definitely blessed the kingdom of God through the ministry of knowledge of Dr. Crawford. Dr. Crawford, we typically close our podcast with narratives, stories, anecdotes that take place throughout the years. So here we have Brother Salazar reconnecting with him. Anything that you can bring us into your memory lane when it comes to this brother and the ministry that you guys did together.
Oh, yeah. He mentioned that we had been to Europe together. It was one of those Christmas market tours. And I remember being in Germany and telling him the story of, I don't know if it's a true story or not, but it's a great story about when President Kennedy spoke at the Berlin Wall after the fall of the wall. And he was trying to impress the people by speaking his German. And what he wanted to say was, Ich bin Berliner. In other words, we are all Berliners. The whole world is Berliners, and we're with you. And but he added a article into the thing that didn't belong there, and he said, "Ich bin ein Berliner," which takes the emphasis off Berlin and places it on a well-known jelly-filled donut in Germany, a Berliner. If you went into a donut place in Germany and ordered a Berliner, they would give you a jelly donut. So what Kennedy actually said was, "We are all donuts." Now, the reason that's funny with Joel is that everybody that knows Joel knows that he is addicted to donuts. And I would sometimes pass his office on the way to the worship service on Sunday morning and see a box of 12 donuts sitting on his desk. And you knew, don't eat one of those. Those belong to Joel. So for the rest of our friendship, we have reflected on the Berliners. And, sometimes we just have to say, well, Joel, we're just a bunch of donuts, all donuts.
It's just the sweetness of life, I guess.
Amen. That's right.
And there are people who think that ministry is all serious business, and it is serious business.
Yes.
But God allows us to laugh sometimes.
Amen. That's right.
Definitely. Well, Joel, it's a pleasure to meet you, brother. Thank you for just taking us into beautiful experiences and challenging experiences, which is ministry, is life. Thank you for your service. Thank you for this many years of service. As a pastor, I can tell you that I'm so appreciative of the men and women that I have served with, under, that I've been able to supervise throughout the years. And I can tell you, as a pastor, and Dr. Crawford is going to agree with me on this one, I think, is that the inner circle, those individuals that serve with you in pastoral, environments and roles, they potentially make you or break you.
That's right.
You have been in support of pastors throughout the years, and many ministers, whether it's music, and back in the day, there were ministers of education, youth ministry, and children's ministry, all of those ministries. Man, for us pastors, we are eternally grateful.
Amen.
So thank you, brother. Thank you for all you do, and thank you for your ministry. Dr. Crawford, always grateful to talk to you, and we'll see you guys next time in the Discipleship Directives with our podcast. Have a wonderful day, and God bless. This is episode number Discipleship. This is a brand new podcast and Dr. Crawford. It's good to have you this morning. Join us, Dr. Crawford. How are you?